But let's have a look then at what we're learning about the psychological environment for our kids in 2019. So this is from 2017, a survey that was done by Children's Mental Health Ontario. And what did it show? That almost half of Ontario's youth are missing school because of anxiety. So that was just a survey that was done, random survey. But then we've got the CAMH survey that's been done for more than 40 years now, every 2 years. They survey, I think, about 11,000 students. And these are 11,000 students whose parents have written a consent to say, yes, they're allowed to do this. So imagine the students who didn't take that consent home. So imagine how high these numbers could possibly be. So what they said in 2013, moderate to serious psychological distress has gone up from 24 to 34%, and then in 2017, it's gone up even higher. Almost 40% are describing moderate to severe to serious psychological distress, and in 2017, almost 20% of kids are describing serious psychological distress. What's up here? What's going on? And also from CAMH, you see this trend here as you look at the reporting of how do you feel your life is. They're saying that it's not so great. You can see how it's going up, the higher percentage who are reporting that they've got poor mental health. So there are different ways of looking at things. You can do a survey and just ask a whole bunch of kids like they do, or you can do a survey plus more in-depth interviews. And that's what the Ontario Child Health Survey and the Ontario School Mental Health Survey. So they looked at 32,000 kids. And what they did was, with a number of them, they actually did in-depth psychiatric interviews with them. And what they found was that there was 11% of students reported needing professional help for mental health concerns. When they did the interviews, what they found was that 14% met diagnostic criteria for an anxiety disorder, but that 3 times that number perceived that they were mentally unwell. So they didn't meet criteria for a diagnosis, but they felt that they needed psychological help, that they were unwell. And so when you start looking then at how pervasive this problem is, this from the Toronto District School Board survey, where they had 220,000, they had a whole bunch of kids and parents. I've just lost the number and it's not in my notes. But a lot, really a lot, and they asked parents too. But what you see here is our kids are under stress and pressure. You see that is almost 50%. And another very interesting stat that comes from the CAMH study is that the number of kids who turn to their parents for support is less than 40. Now, that may have a lot to do with culture. When I was talking about this with some colleagues at the Offord Centre, they said the one young fellow who was of Chinese origin said, "I would never turn to my parents. It's always my friends I turn to." So there are some cultural things involved in that, but still, it's a wake-up call to say, hey, man, who are these kids talking to? Well, guess who they're talking to? They are doing lots of online connectivity, but they are missing out on the connection, the true feeling felt by those around them. And look at this one. This strikes me as very, very sad, that when they asked in the Toronto District School Board survey about positive emotions, you see that more and more children in grades 9 to 12, the older kids get, the less content they are with their world. So we need a huge antidote. We need a huge antidote for this. And it's not just so, for me as a child psychiatrist, this suffering is enough to pay attention to, right? This is enough to say, listen, government, don't you dare start taking money away from mental health. Don't you dare start, because the thing about this is our emotion, we don't learn anything unless we're emotionally connected to it somehow. We don't learn anything unless we're emotionally connected to it somehow. And if we've got kids who 54% of them like the way they look, that means that 46% are in schools thinking about how they look, not about how they learn. They're under pressure, consistent and predictable pressure to perform rather than to learn. So we have to be really thinking. Remember it said about the next 7 generations? Well, one of the things we need to be thinking about for the next 7 generations, quite selfishly, is these young people today are the ones who are going to be the voters, who determine who is going to govern our country. But as we look back, we can also say, wow. So the people who have voted the way we are currently, and we'll hear much more about this from Stuart, but why is there this huge shove over to a lack of civility and so much that goes on? So when we talk about democracy, we're talking about something that is held so close to the beliefs of Canadians and Scots, I have to say. So democracy comes from the Greek. It means people power. It means that we have the opportunity and the right and the responsibility, I would say, to to create the system of government that is by the whole population or all of the eligible members of a state, typically through elected individuals. So the 5 foundations of democracy, as we're thinking about this, and remember, I want you to keep in mind, what is it that makes us well? And now I want to introduce, what is it that makes us democratic? What is it that creates a civic mindset? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about mindset. So for this, the 5 foundations or basic principles, and I'll give it to you in 2 kind of forms, but one is social equality. You know this, all men are created equal, all women and men are created equal. Well, you know what? That ain't true if you're living in Michigan. Because in Michigan, by law, as I said, it is all right to give a shitey education. And that's Scottish, so it's not swearing at all. That we say in a democracy. So I want you to think about, well, how do you create in students, the concept that everybody's voice counts? How do you create that social equity? I'm going to tell you that one of the things that I really worry about is that we have spent a whole long time focusing on and privileging certain ways of knowing, like literacy and numeracy, which I love. I love literacy and numeracy. We absolutely need it. But as we've been privileging those languages, we've left out the other languages that count, that kids come to school with. It worries me terribly that little ones are being identified in kindergarten as being violent, being left in rooms, not able to be touched, and the room is cleared out. It worries me dreadfully that that is happening, because we're not saying, what are your needs? How can I understand what language you are speaking? How can I head this off at the pass? And, you know, we'll learn lots about how to manage challenging behaviours. But if you don't have a lens that says social equity is our drive, if we don't have that, then we're not saying, what do you come to me in school with? We see certain populations are indigenous, and in many ways the TDSB results are showing us our African Canadian young people are disadvantaged in our school system. Well, you know, screw that. The problem is not that they're the problem. The problem is that the school system is not meeting their educational needs. It's not, are they ready for school? It's, are schools ready for them? And privileging the language and the knowledge that they bring in. So I'm not going to get any more heated than that. That was my social equity little... So the other rules, things from democracy, are that the majority rule. The majority rule, that minority, though, we can't infringe through our majority on the rights of others. That freedom to choose, freedom to not choose, and integrity, honesty, compassion, freedom from corruption. All of these have a basic in the fundamental ethical principle of mutual respect for diversity. How do we get there? How do we get to mutual respect for diversity? So another way of thinking about this or describing this, every person, everyone is worthy of being part of our democracy. For a long time, our educational system was not one that said we have to be educating and finding the potential in all children. It's different now. It's different now as a more focus on equity. So equal opportunities, legal equity, regardless of gender, religion, or race, majority rule and minority rights, but you can't infringe on the rights of those who oppose, the necessity of compromise. So if we were to make a list then of what are the characteristics of a democratic person, you see that these have to be imbued within. Individual freedom, as long as it doesn't infringe on others' rights.